The biggest draw that I had to you guys, besides the mission, which was like central, and we'll jump into this, is more like I see you guys as peers, and I think that empowers me to take bigger risks. You know, like me and Jared have like a very peer relationship, and like we're similar in age as well. And I think that that's the type of relationships like I value the most from my investors. Because obviously, like if shit hits the fan, I know he's gonna give me like some hard advice. Yep. But also like as we're kind of both developing in our careers and kind of growing, you know, it just kind of gives you that like competitive edge. And that's something you were talking about earlier, you know, kind of in this whole idea of mentorship. You were talking more that, you know, the people that really made the biggest difference in your life are almost like your peers. Yep. So I think that, you know, being surrounded by great people that are kind of like at your level building themselves as well, you know, I have seen this. They're the ones that kind of help you with the most forward momentum. You know, because you're kind of looking left and right, and they're like, okay, I got to keep my shit together.
They're in the trenches with you.
Yeah, so how's that been for you? You know, like who have been some of those peers that have really helped you become the person that you are?
Yeah, I mean, by far, Jared, I would say number one, and then Brandon number two, and then my wife number three. I think being in the trenches and seeing people battle, and it's like we all kind of went to similar schools. We all moved to New York at the same time. And so it's like, oh, like, you know, they're moving up. I got to move up, right, to your point. And, you know, I have mentors who are 20, 30 years ahead. But like times are different, right? I think it's like what they had to do to get to where they are has changed. And so like there is some level of like, yes, like I want to follow your path, but like I also want to accelerate your path, right? Because, you know, we're fortunate. We're like a diversity focused fund couldn't exist 20 years ago. Like a black person at 30 probably couldn't manage hundreds of millions of dollars before. Like it just wasn't a thing. And so I think like we're grateful for that opportunity. We know the times have changed. And so part of it is like that may be perceived as more risk. And I remember like we had people tell us like, hey, like leave HBS and like Harvard Business School and go continue to work and like build your career and then start your fund, right? Like these are like old, like black people who've made tons of money and like that's the path they took, right? And so I think part of it like was like, why are you telling me this? Like I'm already on this path. This is my dream. This is my goal. Part of it is me taking a step back and realizing like, hey, like this is the path they had to take 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But then like, let me realize like that's not the journey I have to take. And that's really hard because like when you're looking at people who are older than you and like they're your mentors, oftentimes you can think like, oh, like I want to like be them. But like, and you're going to take the path that they took. And that's not necessarily the best path for you. And then when you don't take their path, like they also may view you as like being, oh, this young, cocky, arrogant person, right? And like, you have to accept that. Like, yeah, like I may be viewed that way to certain people because I'm not taking their path, or I'm like, yes, like at 28 years old, like I want to manage $175 million. Like that sounds pretty arrogant. Like you're really young. Like, what do you know about managing that much money? But that's just part of the journey.
I love that. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who's, you know, building a startup and, you know, very talented engineer. He's been at it for a while. And it's interesting because I was talking to him the other day about, you know, obviously like he's kind of at that stage where like the company's profitable and he's thinking about like really taking it to the next level, but he's been bootstrapping from the beginning. And the interesting thing that he mentioned to me was like how when he got started, like venture capital felt like something that was like so deeply out of his league that he was like, I'm just gonna bootstrap. Like this shit will never happen for me. You know, and he's diverse as well. And I thought that was so interesting. And, you know, the more people that I get to talk to a lot of times, like particularly founders of color, we kind of think that way. So we kind of have like a default bootstrapper mentality because it couldn't possibly happen for us because there's no representation. So we're just going to worry about, you know, one of my friends put it like, we don't think about like, oh, we need X, Y, and Z so that we can make money. We're going to focus on making money and then we're going to, you know, make X, Y, and Z happen. So it's been interesting because that's kind of like the forced path I think that a lot of diverse founders have to take naturally, which I think is an advantage now. I think particularly in markets of today, you know, being able to do a lot with very little, I think becomes a very valuable skill. But it's not particularly something that anybody wants to do. Bootstrapper is 10x harder. You know, it teaches you a lot of things.
It's riskier.
And it's riskier. So obviously the capital component always really, it's an accelerant when there's something there. It could become a trap if you take too much money. There's really no traction, stuff like that. So there's a fine balance to be played. But I think that's a lot of founders that have the grit, that have the ideas, that have the traction, yet they still feel like venture is so far abstracted from what they could achieve that they just kind of go on this track. And I think it's an injustice because you see so many companies that could do great, never really live up to their full potential. And I think that's one of the coolest things that you guys do when you invested in CASHDROP. You know, again, the mission was a very important component to me. So how does that feel for you? Obviously, like you play a very important role in our communities of color, in the venture industry. Again, going back to even like not only are you doing that, but you're a very young person in this industry. What would you tell to a founder that's kind of getting started? They feel like they could never raise any capital. They're focused on bootstrapping. Like, how do you kind of help them?
Yeah, I think there's two pieces. So I'll go to the piece about the representation piece and kind of the mentorship we were talking. So when we started, there were no, like Crunchbase didn't track by race, right? This is a post-George Floyd thing. Now Crunchbase and PitchBook all track by race. And so before we were like, hey, like we always hear the stats, less than 1% of funding goes to Black Latinos, less than 0.001% goes to Black women. But like nobody actually could tell us like who they were, or like what industries were they in, what stage, what cities, et cetera. And so like that's where the Harlem Capital Diverse Founder Report started. It was just us trying to figure out like, okay, if we're gonna invest in diverse founders, like we need to know who they are, right? Like who's already raised venture capital, like who can we go to talk to like hear their stories, and what are the issues, would you take our money over whoever's money you took? Right, and so now we found last year's report was 870 Black Latino founders have raised $1 million or more. Right, so I think it was really important to do that, because I think when you say 1% of funding goes to Black Latinos, that doesn't inspire the person who's working at Facebook or Google to want to go raise venture capital, to your point, right? They want to bootstrap, because like I keep hearing these stats, but when you say, oh, like there's been close to 1,000 Black Latino founders who've raised $1 million, and I think last year we had 29 unicorns, right? There's 29 unicorns in that group. There's 69 who've raised 100 million plus, like, and here's the list, like here's the cities they're in, here's the industries they've in, like that like gives you, even though it's still the same 1%, like now I have like a visual perspective of who that 1% is, and that gives me some hope, right? I think that was helpful for me as a manager. There's probably 20 Black Latino managers who manage $1 billion plus, and like nobody really tracks the list. And so I started to do that work myself. And like I reached out to a bunch of those managers when we were fundraising, and just like hearing their stories and seeing and working for one myself, like was enough to say, okay, even though it's only 20, like I can see their faces, I know who they are. I think that's really important. That to me, it's been the biggest move of like mentorship. It's not always, like, I don't need to like have them talking to me one-on-one. It's just knowing and like looking at their journeys and hearing their path. I think second, once you see that journey and it's like, okay, I want to raise venture capital, I think the first thing to understand is like, what is the difference between a bootstrap small business versus a venture capital business? There's a few key things that really make something venture. One is like, you've got to be high margins. It's a big reason why people don't invest in consumer products anymore. The Caspers, the Allbirds, like all these companies have failed largely because these are 30%, 20% gross margin businesses, which means you don't have a lot of profit, right? So high margin for different investors, that means different things. I would say typically that's like 70% plus gross margins, right? The second thing, which really gets founders trapped, is growth. So like, can you grow your business 3x plus year over year for a 5 to 7 year period? Sounds pretty easy, but that's 15% month over month, right? That's not easy. And I would say the last big thing is the market size, right? So are you in a market that's multi-billion dollars, and do I believe that your business can get some percentage, right? So if your TAM is, your total addressable market is 10 billion, do I believe you can get 10% of that market and be $1 billion business?
And do you think that fact of like because I agree, even with like Latino communities, like a lot of the businesses we create are like, they cap out a relatively small
businesses
thing.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, but to me there is to some degree. It's like, because obviously that's kind of like the path that they say, look, we're never going to get a good job, so we're going to build a business. So that inherently is the attitude you want to have as an entrepreneur. But then the business that you go on and build is something that's going to be like a little mom and pop shop business. Do you think is the culture at large is what really kind of forces this like mentality of like, okay, you could be an entrepreneur, but like you're going to be a small business? Do you think that there's a cultural factor here that's kind of preventing all these people that are already willing to put a lot on the line for the pursuit of a dream to aim to bigger types of businesses? So it's not necessarily, I don't think we're capable of doing that, but our people aren't doing it for a reason. I reflect on this a lot. What do you think that is?
I mean, I think there's two things. I think, you can't be what you can't see. And so when you live in these communities and you see beauty shops and barber shops and people selling, stuff on the corner, like that's what you're going to be, right? And so I think part of it is like, this is what you've grown around. Your parents like ran the shop, whatever it may be. I think secondly, like from an economical standpoint, like there's only so many venture-backed businesses that can succeed, right? I think there's like 6,000 to 8,000 businesses that get funded a year. Of those 6,000 to 8,000, whatever, 50 to 100 like probably like generate the majority of returns, right? And so like, that's not scalable for millions of Americans, right? And so I think it's like from an economy standpoint, small businesses have always dominated the U.S. economy from GDP outside of consumer spending, right? And so I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And the question becomes, and it's something I think about a lot, is how can we create fun infrastructures to help these small businesses reach the next level, right? So like a big goal that we have at the Amazon board is like, how do we get people, black businesses, to at least generate $250,000 of revenue? Right. We found that if you generate $250,000 of revenue as a sole proprietor business, then you can like live a sustainable middle income life, right? And so it's like even just getting people from 60K to 250 is a huge deal.
It's huge
for a lot of these businesses.
I'm a savage capitalist. I am very ambitious. And, you know, part of the reason is I have nothing to lose. I come from nothing. So, like, I'm just going to fucking swing as big as possible. And I know a lot of people that inherently believe that about themselves. And kind of the reason why I wanted to name the show 1 in a Billion was, like, it's not so much that I believe I'm, like, a 1 in a billion chance, but it's more like the mindset that I want to, like, spark on, at least on the people that can look at my story and say, if he's doing it, I can do it better, right? Yeah. Like, because you just have to fundamentally believe that you're, like, that person is going to overcome, because it's not easy. The odds are stacked up against you. And whether you succeed or fail, at the end of the day, I think the journey will be the most satisfying piece. Agreed. You know, and I think that that's a mindset that needs to desperately be cascaded down to other people that share our bringing. Not everybody's going to make it. Not everybody's going to be hyper successful. But success, to me, is a mindset more than an outcome. How do we kind of spark that mentality from people so that they really believe that they can? Because, you know, obviously, I think about this all the time. Like, I think blacks and Latinos, we have to be, what, 40% of the buying power in this country? I mean, it's a sizable chunk, right? Yep. Are we generating that in terms of their returns?
Definitely
not even close.
Yeah, definitely not.
Right. And that, you're talking hundreds of billions. Yep. Of potential right there. So, you know, while I think at the vast majority of the sustainable thing is, yes, like the middle, the backbone of the economy will always be small business, you know, I'm trying to channel like the few, like the 10. You know, there's still only, you said 69 people that have raised more than 100 million that are black or Latino owned businesses. How do we get that to 4 digits? You know, it doesn't have to be a lot of them, but I think like 10, 20, 30, that cascades down to like an ecosystem where there's more small businesses. There's a lot of other fundings.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I agree. You know, I think our internal term is like white boy confidence, right? I think it's not like you need to act white. I think it's to your point, it's a mentality mindset. I think there's a lot of barriers and systemic, you know, infrastructure that's allowed white men to have the confidence they do. And, you know, we were talking earlier about Adam Newman, right? To fail that big and then still raise $350 million is a huge privilege. But I think once you realize, like, oh, like, this is what white men have felt their entire life.
Yes.
Like, where it's like you're in an environment, like, just to thrive. That was really mind-opening. That after ICV, I went to Harvard Business School and I started recruiting. And, you know, I was like, I want to work in venture capital, and 99% of venture capital firms don't have black partners, period, let alone the top partner. I was just like, I can't go back to that environment because I'm not going to be my best self. Right? And that was a big reason we really decided, like, hey, let's just raise a fund for Harlem Capital. We didn't actually go into business school wanting to raise a fund, but we started recruiting, and after working at a black-owned fund, it was just like, yeah, I can't go back to Bank of America anymore. Like, I can get by. I'll move up the ranks. I'll make a lot of money, but I'm not going to be operating at 100%.
That's so powerful, and got the chills because it's so fucking true. It's so real. Like, and this is something that I'm very, very adamant, and I want to kind of touch a little bit on this topic because obviously you have been very lucky to have a lot of really incredible opportunities that, you know, you kind of are like the exception within the exception within the exception. So like, you know, being able to go to Harvard, being able to kind of like see these institutions and see the white man power structure from within and understand why that's so important to have for people to feel like they can really excel and really achieve their dreams, you know, and I've been able to see it now, you know, slowly from my perspective, and it makes me so jealous for my people. And it's something that I literally, you know, I knew early on, like, it might take me 10 times the work, but like, I don't want to ring the fucking NASDAQ bell where I'm the only one that kind of got all the benefit. I need to look left and I need to look right, and it needs to represent that vision, because at the end of the day, you know, it will be all for nothing.
Yep.
And I'm very conscious about this. You know, like I understand the position of what CASHDROP could achieve if it becomes really big. That's why I'm like, look, I'm willing to go slow, to go fast, because we need to think in decades. Because what this company can represent, not only for the one Latino founder, but to the community and the people that we ultimately serve, which is our entrepreneurs and people that are trying to build their dreams, is super fucking important that the company behind the scene represents those values, you know, internally. And to me, you know, I kind of had this early identity crisis when, you know, I went from like, oh, you know, nobody would fund me. Then I met you guys, and you guys seated me, and I've never seen, you know, millions of dollars in the bank before. So now I'm like, okay, now I can literally I'm in the big leagues now. But then it felt even lonelier now because, you know, like now you start talking, oh, now you need to hire from Harvard and top schools and this and this and this and this. And like I met a lot of people from these pipelines, but none of them look like me. Yep. You know what I'm saying? So it started kind of looking really weird to me. And I started kind of asking myself, like, what does top people mean? What is like the best, high caliber, and all these keywords that we throw mean? And I realized like a lot of people that I want to champion, a lot of the people that are me 6 months ago don't have these check boxes on a paper that I will never get to meet them if I go this path, right? And it might take a little bit more risk from my end. It might take a little bit more of a, you know, like a crapshoot to see if somebody, if you kind of go out of your way to give somebody an opportunity, it may or may not work. We might have to work a little harder to develop and invest in those people. But like ultimately, I think, you know, it may or may not be the best business decision, but I think it's a responsibility to have in somebody that's kind of undergoing and going through this process.
And that's freaking dope, man.
Thank you, bro.
Super proud of that.
And I've talked to some of my white investors, and, you know, some of them will be like, you don't have to carry the load of your people on your back. You do know that, right? And I'm like, yeah, I don't. But, like, if I don't, who will?
Well, yeah.
You know, it's like we're not here to just make ourselves rich. We're here to be rich as fuck, but we're here to mean something to the greater community. That's really what's going to help. That's really what, you know, and it translates into story. But I think that it becomes also our edge. It becomes our engine, you know. And so
I love this point before you ask the question.
Yep.
Because it's something I think about a lot, right? I tweeted something a couple of weeks ago where I think about like if Harlem Capital fails, right? I think the Adam Newman story kind of really put into light, like what does that mean for diverse founders? What does that mean for other diverse GPs, right? And so I think about that often because like we are so public in brand. There are so few of us. I think, you know, based on my calculation, we're the 5th largest Black-owned VC fund, right, which is wild, at 175 million of AUM, and I think that's an extra weight. And it's like I think it's you have to own that acceptance. Like, hey, like I do represent every Black person when I walk in a room because often I am the only Black person. But I think at the same time you have to acknowledge it, but you can't allow it to suppress your dreams. And that's a hard balance of saying like, hey, I know that if I fail, there are going to be more repercussions for others. And Willie at ICV, my old boss, like used to say this all the time. He's like, you know, he's probably the 4th largest Black-owned private equity fund. He's like, I know that if I fail, like what happens for others? Because all the LPs who are funding, it's a small world. They're all talking like, oh, we tried, right? We invested in Harlem Capital, didn't work out. Diverse founders can't, you know, generate X size returns. And oftentimes I hate it when we go into LP meetings and they would say, hey, like, you know, why do you think diverse founders can outperform the market? I was like, I think they can perform. Like, why do they have to outperform for you to give me money? Like, why can't they just be average, like every other venture fund, and like you fund me and we can be average? But that's the mindset of non-minorities is like, I'm only going to fund you if I think you can beat the market. Right. I really don't like that perspective. And so I would be very decisive going to meetings telling LPs like, hey, like we have to remove that mentality. Like we think we can generate market returns. Right. And like, yes, like we do believe that our strategy will return alpha. But like, you shouldn't only back us because we think diverse founders can outperform white founders.
That's and I think that's a blessing and the curse of being like the token Mexican or the token Black guy, because we're not going to fail. We're going to fucking outperform the market. And like, that's the mentality that I think that you and I have. But I think it kind of also creates this like unrealistic standard as well. When you only have like that one minority person, then you're like, you have to overperform. But I think to us, you know, normalization is where we can accept average outcomes from people that don't look the par and be able to take gambles on them. And that's what's very important to do for the problems that we have to kind of fix themselves long term. At the end of the day, right, like we're playing to win, and we want to achieve massive success. And again, not only for us, but like to be in a position where you can show the younger version of yourself that it's doable. I would say, like, I want to inspire that kid to look at me and say, he's doing it so shittily, I can do it better and I can do it bigger. But like that mentality is really what's needed.
Yeah. I think about that a lot. I mean, I think it's hard, right? I think, there are different struggles within the community. I think being a person of color who's middle income or upper income has its own struggles, right? There's its own struggles of, I was at a comedy show last night at the Comedy Bar, and this black guy was like, who in this audience was like in an all white community, right? I think the initial reaction would be like, and some of the white people raised their hands and some didn't. And then like me, my mom, and my wife raised their hand. People kind of looked at us and it's like we literally grew up like in all white environments, right? Like there are benefits to being in the middle class and being in these neighborhoods, but like there's a lot of like things that like deeply ingrain you, like, cause you begin to like, I was the only black person from first to sixth grade. Wow. Right. And so it's like I was confused for a long time, and people would touch my afro. And I remember the first time I got called the N-word, and I was the only black kid on the basketball team. So everybody looked to me like, oh, you have to be the best. Like you're black. And I think there's a lot of, I feel empathetic because I've seen both sides. Cause like I still have family in Haiti. I still have, cousins and people who live in Detroit. So I would go from the neighborhood, to the suburb to the city, right? Like very frequently were like dead bodies next to my aunt's house in the alley. And so I saw both perspectives, and I was like, I understand like these struggles, but I think so often our community gets separated by colorism, right? Light skin versus dark skin, lower class versus middle class, and you think like, oh, like you don't get it, right? You're Carlton, from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and it's like, no, like we all have different, unique perspectives, and like I think that's the unicorn issue for a lot of people of color who've raised millions of dollars. It's like there's so few of us, and when you go home, like you can't talk to your family about this. Like, even my parents as doctors, like my mom's like, you give people how much money, right? Like it's just crazy to them. Like you're giving $2-3 million checks to like 25, 30-year-olds, right? And so I think I've seen that, and it's a struggle. I go back and forth, and I think it's a journey for a lot of people of color, lower class, middle class, upper class, like that have to figure out like that personal journey themselves. And there's not a lot of people you can talk to about it.
I love that. It's so true. What's the biggest piece of advice, I think, that you give your younger self, like with everything that you've kind of been through, reflecting back on, the highs and the lows of the journey, 17-year-old Henri, is looking up to somebody like you because now there's representation. What is that advice you give yourself to kind of power through that imposter syndrome, that whole like colonial hangover mentality, the self-deprecating nature?
Colonial hangover.
Yeah, like self-deprecating, thing, and also being like the one token black guy, the one, like just the only one. What's the advice for that person?
I mean, I think ultimately, I've read a bunch of business school applications and others, and I always tell people like, you just have to be you. I think the faster you can be authentic, be yourself, the faster you will be successful. It's really hard to beat somebody at their purpose, right? And so, one of my cousins, was always like, oh, I want to be in finance. Like you make so much money. As I do, like, he's a DJ now, and he works in the education system. He's always been about empowering people of color, like from a community standpoint, education wise. I was like, yes, I make a lot of money. I work on Wall Street, but I'm like, but this is like not your purpose. This is not who you are. Like, you don't like numbers. Like, you don't like working 100 hours a week. Like, you're not about like wearing the suits in the subway of life, right? Like, you like to help people during the day, and you like to DJ at night, right? And so I'm like, you're never like the market is so competitive, right? You're never gonna beat me, not because you're not better than me, but because like I love this. Like I love numbers. I love investing in companies. I love working long hours. Like this is like who I am. It's my purpose. I really believe that. And so I always tell people like the faster you can be authentic to yourself, the faster you find your purpose in life. And the faster you find your purpose in life, like the more successful you'll become. Right. And so I think too frequently, like because there are so few of us, we're looking to like that one, we're like, oh, I want to be that person. But it's like, take some time back. And that's the beauty of business school when you're writing your essays. Like when you're like, hey, I'm not going to make money for 2 years and I'm going to pay you $250,000. Like you like better like reflect on like, hey, like what am I doing? Like, why am I making this sacrifice? Like, what do I want to do with my life after this step? I think that's like a really important reflection that like most people generally in professional world don't get to take. Right, but particularly people of color, like you don't have time to take a step back and just reflect and figure out like, hey, like what am I doing? Who am I as a person? Like, and like what is like my dream? Like what are my passions? And when I see people do that, like it's very clear. And like once Harlem Capital happened, it was so clear like this was like exactly where I was meant to be. And I was thriving, I was authentic, and now like similar to you, like we're creating an authentic environment where like everybody at our firm, like Nicole, who's one of our associates, is queer, and she's like, this is the first time at work people have known I'm queer. right? And that power of like her just being authentic, like I've seen her just like flourish the last like year and a half. And it's really inspiring, right? I think it's like if you can't create environments where people can bring their whole selves as a founder, like you're really detrimenting your company. And as a person, if you can't find environment to create your own environments for that, then you're not going to be your best self.
I love that. I think the key word is purpose. I agree. Like, and I always tell, you know, even people here at CASHDROP, like you kind of just have to have something you're willing to die for. Like nothing, you will never fail if you stand on that platform. Like it's honestly the only thing that nothing will ever knock you from. And it's been the most empowering to me to be able to build this platform based on that purpose and like enabling others to kind of have that, you know, it's just like it's so much bigger than just like the capitalism and the like the money is the engine that would enable the ecosystem to thrive. So it's kind of like the main resource, but then like it touches so many aspects of people's lives, probably far beyond what you and I even think, you know, and currently think that it can do. Yeah. So I think, I mean, that's honestly to wind it down. Like, just thank you for the time.
You're special, man. We're definitely grateful to be investors in you guys. It's been awesome to see the journey.
Thank you.
And you're inspiring a lot of people.